Out front now, Republican Senator from North Dakota, Kevin Cramer. And Senator, I appreciate your time. You were there today. What did you think of Trump's defense team's performance?
Well, Aaron, my first thought was that I don't think they were very well prepared for what was something other than a discussion about the jurisdictional question. While the House managers got to that point, it took them a long time to get there. I think they'd spent more of their time setting the table for what's going to be done over the next 2 days than on this question, realizing they had already had at least 55 votes to move forward. So I think that threw Mr. Castor off a little bit, quite honestly. And then, of course, it wasn't until about the 90th minute that Mr. Schoen actually got to the actual text of the Constitution, which dealt with the question of jurisdiction. So that was, I think they were thrown off, frankly. I think they were unprepared. All of that said, however, both sides made relevant points to what's next. I think in the case of the president's defense team, they focused a lot on things, constitutional questions like due process, free speech, the casting of the wide net, which was really more of a Senate rules question. All of those are relevant. Maybe they're even relevant to a potential dismissal, but none of them addressed the constitutional jurisdictional question, which is what today was supposed to be all about.
Right, it was supposed to be about, and I will tell you, it was addressed very specifically and in great detail by Congressman Raskin when he talked about it. Mm-hmm. And I should note, obviously, this is the second time, Senator, that you voted to say that the trial itself is unconstitutional. So you've been consistent there. Right. But Democrats and Raskin went through this long list, right, of history. You know, he talked about James Monroe, and when the founding fathers were alive, the only context in which impeachment was used was for formal officials. He quoted and listed many conservative lawyers and jurists and constitutional scholars who have all come to the conclusion that this is indeed constitutional. He cited Republican lawyer Chuck Cooper, and I know you read this, but let me read it for our viewers. Mr. Cooper says, given that the Constitution permits the Senate to impose the penalty of permanent disqualification only on former office holders, it defies logic to suggest that the Senate is prohibited from trying and convicting former office holders. Did you find none of this compelling?
I found it interesting. I thought that they did a better job of presenting their point, although I don't think the opposite point is that difficult to present, and that is the plain reading of the Constitution. The term "the president," not former presidents, the president shall be removed from office, and when you refer to that, the president, in one context, it's the same person in every context. I think that's the fundamental plain reading of the Constitution, quite honestly, Aaron, but also remembering that the question is only answered by the Senate in this case, which I think baffles a lot of people. They think that somehow a bunch of constitutional lawyers on one side or the other can bring this to the Supreme Court, or the Chief Justice would rule on it or something like that. The Senate governs itself. I'm very comfortable. I'm a simple guy. I'm not a lawyer. The plain reading seemed pretty clear to me that it was beyond our jurisdiction. That said, a majority voted that it is not, and that it is within our jurisdiction, and tomorrow we start the trial.
But what about that point, that the Senate can only impose the penalty of permanent disqualification on former office holders? But you can't do that unless you convict. I mean, that's just a very clear layout, again, from one of the chief conservative constitutional jurists in this country.
Sure, and the way I read that is a limitation on our powers. That's not a granting of powers. That's a limitation on powers. The conviction part of it has to obviously come first, because you can't do the other. And it, by the way, it does raise another question that I intend to ask if we get the opportunity to ask, and that is the sentencing part of this. How many senators might vote for impeachment but not then vote for permanent removal from office? And by the way, what is it that Democrats are so afraid of? That's, I know, secondary to the point here, but why are they so afraid that Donald Trump might run again? I mean, do they really believe that he could win another election?
Well, nobody believed it last time, Senator. I would be shocked if you think it's just not possible. I mean, that doesn't seem like a good reason here. Let me ask you about something else, though, because you did criticize your Democratic colleagues in the House, who are the impeachment managers, in a statement that you put out earlier today. You said, Senator, quote, while Speaker Pelosi has backbenchers come before the Senate to make her case, she sent the rest of the House home instead of carrying out the actual work of the American people. I do want to note the lead impeachment manager, Jamie Raskin, he's a professor of constitutional law at American University for more than 25 years, Harvard Law graduate. He's exactly the kind of guy, the first string guy that you would pick to make the case. He made an excellent case today. And then here's what the Trump lawyers said about him.
I'll be quite frank with you. We changed what we were going to do on account that we thought that the House manager's presentation was well done.
Do you stand by that, backbenchers?
Well, I think that Mr. Raskin did a superior job, frankly. I actually think that, that they all did a pretty good job. But again, he did a nice job presenting. But when I refer to backbenchers, I'm talking about as legislators. The fact that they're even doing this, Aaron, raises serious partisan political questions for me. The fact that they're even bringing in impeachment articles within a year for the second time. I mean, the fact that they did this 48 hours after getting the articles and then withheld them until late in this process for trial, almost as though they were preparing for the trial to be done after President Trump left office. So there are a lot of questions that I have about how good they are. Their presentation was very good. There's no question about it. It was superior. It makes the point that I made up front, and that is that I think that the president's attorneys were not prepared to deal with anything other than the specific constitutional question.
Yeah, but you're saying they also lost on how they presented the constitutional question. You voted on their side because you've come to that conclusion yourself, not because of what they said today. That's what you're saying.
No, it's not what I'm saying at all. I said, while they made a superior, presentation, the presentation for the defense is an easier one. It's a plain reading of the Constitution. So they were adequate to that task. They didn't spend very much time on it. Frankly, there's not a lot of time to spend on it. It's not a complicated question. The president is the president, and that president is who we're talking about when we're talking about impeachment and removal from office.
When you talk about the superior performance of Congressman Raskin and the other managers, arguably the most powerful part of what they did today was not laying out the constitutionality, although that was itself extremely powerful. It was that dramatic 13-minute video that left so many of you in silence, right? That shows former President Trump and the insurrection unfolding during that day. I want to replay part of it, Senator, for any of our viewers who didn't see it. I'm not playing all of it, just a part here. I want to warn anyone who hasn't seen it, though, that the images, the language of this is graphic.
Where the fuck are they?
There's gotta be something in here we can fucking use against these scumbags.
That's true. That's what we fucking need to have 30,000 guns up here. That's true. That's what we need. We need fresh patriots abroad.
Senator, it was hard to watch that for all of us, and I'm sure for you and your colleagues, because you were there that day.
That's right.
And something awful could have happened to you or any of your colleagues. But this is why I want to ask you, in that we watched that video of what happened. We experienced, all of us, perhaps a little bit what you experienced in real life. Yet in that same statement where you said Pelosi had backbenchers come before the Senate to make her case, you said, welcome to the stupidest week in the Senate.
Right, yeah. Really, because Aaron, the question isn't whether or not that was an awful night or whether the people that broke multiple laws, hurt people, killed people, stormed the Capitol, trying to stop us from doing our constitutional duty were wrong. I mean, they were clearly wrong. They were awful things that happened, and they should all be punished. But I don't think diverting the blame from them to the president because he gave a speech, that's the question in front of us. And I think that's the standard that they have to meet. And they're not going to meet by showing the same videos over and over and over again.
Can I just ask you one quick question before we go?
Sure.
They wouldn't have been there if the president hadn't told them the election was rigged and stolen from them again and again and again. That's a fact, okay? I hope you and I can both agree on that. Do you think he should be held accountable in any way?
Well, it's an important point. And if he committed a crime, if somebody thinks that there's actually a crime that was committed that would reach a guilty plea, then they should bring it to the U.S. District Court here in D.C. I think that he bears some responsibility for ramping up the rhetoric. There's no question. I said that day that was recklessness in my view. But again, we're talking about a different standard here. We're talking about a standard of inciting violence, and I don't think it meets that standard. I think one of the things I think that the president's lawyers did very well, and that is reminded us without apology of how very, very precious our Constitution is, particularly freedom of speech and freedom of expression at a time when we're experiencing cancel culture, where big tech is shutting down whoever they feel like shutting down. I think that's an important point that can't be lost on a night like this.
All right, I appreciate your time, Senator. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Aaron.